Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name's StepsBasic, and welcome back to my community show. Anyway, so that's not what's important. What's important is today's topic. So, as per usual, when I have finished up a game, I'm trying to get in a good review for them. And in this case, I finished up Observer, and I wanted to do a review for it. But then I'm like, I basically summed it up with what I said at the end of that video. Despite the glitchy weirdness and the annoying flashes, it was actually a very entertaining game, and I recommend it if you don't have any sort of motion sickness or photosensitivity problems. If you do, stay far, far away from this game. So instead of that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the idea, sort of subtext of most cyberpunk things, where they talk about, you know, the whole replacement of the body, because you see it a lot in cyberpunk, you know, getting augmentations and whatnot, and the whole idea behind that. And of course, now this is something I haven't looked too much into, being that well, I've got my opinions, and I mostly just stick to them. And so that's basically what I'm going to share with you today. And the aspect of it is of course, surrounding the discussion of the complete human, whether or not that person exists anymore after they've augmented themselves to oblivion. And of course, you know, our main character in that game, Dan, was highly opposed to the idea of augmentations, and I am not completely without sympathy for that idea, but at the same time, there is a line. See, in some communities, there is a understood belief that this sort of demonizes or dehumanizes people who have been otherly abled, i.e. people who have lost limbs and had to replace them. And in some ways, that the cyberpunk community is showing that this is a bad thing, that they replace their limbs. Of course, this isn't exactly accurate. I mean, a good cyberpunk will portray this idea kind of obscurely, ambiguously, stating, what do you think, sort of thing, rather than saying either side is good or bad. But then there are most of the time, the anti-tech folks, the people who are opposed to the augmentations, tend to be either seen as ridiculously backward or the bad guys. Whereas often they see this idea as an ableist idea, i.e. presenting this as insulting to the differently abled. The problem is that in most cyberpunks, it's not seen as a bad thing. The people who are anti-it are the ones who are the bad guys. And that's one thing I always find a little funny, but, you know, to each their own. And as such, despite that, I do know that there are plenty of people in the world today who would out and out reject that sort of thing. And somewhat to a little bit myself as well. Like, I don't have any issue replacing parts of your body. Like, if you can't see well, get new eyes. If you can't move your arms or walk or whatnot, get new legs or arms, and boom, perfect. I kind of draw the line at putting chips in my brain, though. I'm not a fan of that idea. I don't like the idea of having something, especially as portrayed in Observer, where the Observer fella is able to jack into your brain with a USB cable. I'm like, no, I'm not okay with this. I don't like that idea. So for me, it's like, even to a certain point, I'd be okay with augmenting one's own body, but rather I'd still see it as more of a treatment for the differently abled and whatnot, and I see it as a good thing, an overall good thing. And but then I just draw the line at mental or cerebral things, and this topic came up in both this game and and Soma, the discussion of creating a mind that can exist without the body. I'm not okay with that one. Like, I don't like the idea of having immortal human beings. And again, it comes down to something I said within my video. My last video there was talking about how, no, we kind of need death. It keeps us humble, for one thing, and the idea that a human being's mind would be free floating, free flying through cyberspace and never die, sort of thing. The idea of never dying, anyway, just kind of strikes me as a dangerous path to walk down. The sort of thing that will give men and the ideas of deities. I am no longer bound to that which makes me mortal, therefore I am a god. Of course, limited power and whatnot, but still, I think that death is important, and the idea of removing that from anybody is, well, tantamount to failure as a human species. That's funny, because a lot of people, not just these days, I was going to say a lot of people these days, but a lot of people just in general fear death and look for ways to prolong and push it off. And while I don't necessarily welcome death, because let's face it, I want to live. But while I don't necessarily welcome death, I do see it as a necessary inevitability. We need to die. It is important for, well, everything. The one good thing about the whole uploading your brain to the AI interspace web net, whatever you want to call it, is that at least it removes your ability to reproduce, which is part of the reason why humanity needs death, because it helps to keep our population in check. Because if none of us are dying but we're still reproducing, well, let's face it, that's just going to create an endless supply of bad. Not to mention the fact that people get bored over long weekends if they got nothing to do. And then think about immortality and how long you're going to be living and whatnot with that. You're going to get bored like a couple of weeks, maybe even a year. If you don't have to sleep, don't have to eat, all you can do is just, even if you have a goal of I will absorb all the knowledge in the universe. Yeah, you're going to run out of things to observe. You're going to get bored. And then what's going to happen? You're just going to have to live in your own skull for eternity? Well, I guess technically you live in your own mainframe. Actually, funny enough, I was thinking of a story that I thought could be interesting where kind of piggybacks off the idea of the End of Soma, where everyone uploads their brains into that arc and then yeets themselves into space to get off the planet because it's dying, and then they get picked up by an alien species who has to figure out how to interact with the people within. And I thought that'd be an interesting little thing, an interesting little sci-fi story. I wrote that down, so I'm going to write it up later, but it's a pretty neat one. I like the idea of it. That was another one of those things. Soma, I think, really had it wrong, but it was an interesting hypothesis where they're talking about, you just lucked out. You won the coin flip, as it were, as to where your consciousness ended up. Missing the point entirely that your consciousness ended up everywhere. The only problem with it is what the player saw. So at the very end of Soma, spoilers if you haven't seen it, the guy uploads his mind into the arc and sends it off, but his own mind, his mind is in both places, but we see it from the perspective of the fella who's still on Earth and has to wait for the end of the world. And then he's like, what happened? I'm supposed to be on the ship. Failing to realize that he still exists in both places. And they even showed it at the end of it. It's like he didn't lose any coin flip because his consciousness is still up there. We're just seeing this one's perspective. They're both the same person, as it were. They're both immortal brains floating around in cyberspace. One just has a ambulatory body and the other one doesn't. And, it's a fairly interesting idea. We often see the idea of the cyberpunk future as an inevitability, the sort of way that we're going to end up going eventually, on account of the fact that it's probably the most likely, as humanity's going to keep developing more and more tech. My ear is ringing now. Ah. We're going to keep developing more and more tech and moving further and further away from that which makes us human, which is, again, going back to that original argument, like how much can we replace and still call ourselves human? And I think, in my opinion, as long as we keep our brain in our ambulatory bodies and still have the ability to die, then we're still human, baby. And that is one of the more often asked questions when it comes to these things, though. Like, if I replace all of my limbs, if I get 10 dozen eyes on my face and a metal exoskeleton, am I still human? I'm like, yeah. I mean, be careful of the stuff you remove, because you might not be able to enjoy the fun things that humans get to enjoy. But as long as you can still die, I think you're still human, bro. That's one of the another interesting thing that I find, I'd say, mostly plausible when it comes to that sort of question of how much can we replace before we stop being human, is that it's often portrayed in the religious context, which to me makes the most sense. You would actually see that sort of thing pop up in there. You're like, oh, we were created in God's image, therefore if we mess with God's image, then we're sacrificing that which God gave us, and therefore we're no longer human, sort of thing. But of course, the same argument gets made for things like tattoos and piercings and whatnot on occasions. Although you see a lot less of it these days. When I was growing up in the late 80s and early 90s and whatnot, it was fairly prevalent. God's crying for you because you have tattoos on your face and ear piercings. Oh my God. God don't care. The only thing God cares about is you doing good for the world and for yourself and those around you. That, like I said, that seems like the most plausible outcome is generally going to turn out to be the religious fanatics who are most opposed to the idea of augmentation. It's kind of funny, like my brother, he likes the more genetic modifications rather than the biological one, or he likes the genetic or biological ones more than the cybernetic ones. He likes the idea of being able to give himself cat eyes. My brother's a cat girl, confirmed. But I think that there's a fun argument for that one too. Cybernetic enhancements and whatnot don't really sacrifice too much of the brain in that, unless of course you're giving yourself too many brain implants. But the idea of genetically modifying the human body, i.e. injecting DNA from other species into your body, like how much of that can you do before you lose your human mind? And another story I wanted to write was the idea of genetic and biological enhancements that end up leaching into the brain and contorting the worldview of the humans and eventually resulting in them reverting to the animal form. It's an idea. It's a cool idea. Of course, this all comes back down to that one ship. What's the name of that ship? You got a ship, right? I forget the name of the ship. Sorry. You got a ship, right? It's an ancient Greek ship, and you got it on display in a museum, and you take a board off of it to replace it. Keep it looking good and whatnot, and you put that board aside. And after years of replacing these boards, every board is technically replaced, because it's still that same ship, right? And then, of course, you take all the boards and you build the ship again. Which one is now the ship? The one that has all the pieces replaced, or the one that has all the original pieces? It's an interesting thought experiment. Interesting little mind teaser. But, in the end, I guess it doesn't really matter too much, because it's just a ship. Definitely much more important to think about the humanity. As long as you still got your humanity, you're still you, bro. But anyway, those are my thoughts on the whole cyberpunk and cybernetic enhancement idea, i.e. You do you, bro, but I ain't going to get my brain uploaded anywhere. Of course, I pass the question off to you. Do you like the idea of cybernetic enhancements? And if so, what would you get? I, for one, would like to replace my legs with some cybernetic, robot legs. Because those are the things that hurt me the most. But anyway, apart from all that, my announcements for today. Thanksgiving coming up for us Americans this week. I'm looking at taking off Thursday and maybe Saturday. I don't know yet exactly. So it might be a Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I might get all 3 of those days off. We'll see. I might actually get uploaded pretty well. Who knows? But I'm planning on taking them off. I finished up Observer, obviously. And I'm on the last DLC before I switch games on Borderlands 2, which yay! But I can't wait to get into pre-sequel because that's still my favorite game so far. And that's the amount of my announcements for today. And leave those answers in the comment section down below. And of course, as always, thank you all so much for joining me for this episode of the Steps Basic Community Show. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And if you did, well, please go and pull that like button for it. If you guys see more from me, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Of course, as always, you're more than welcome to leave a comment in the comment section down below. And I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And when I can, if I can, do all that jazz. And tune in next time for another topic, another time. And until then, good night.